Green volunteer group that coordinates educational events covering a wide range of topics. The team that put on today's event includes myself and Jennifer Allen of Waypoint Energy. The Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. To accomplish our mission, we strive to promote green buildings in a few key ways. Educational events such as panels and building tours, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. We are currently developing more web-based programs to engage our network. Our next webinar is Credentialing Healthcare Construction Personnel, a must for public protection. That will be Tuesday, June 2nd at 1 p.m. It's free, and we'll discuss the PCRA/ICRA certificate program by Green Advantage, the only organization that offers this certificate program. Check out our events calendar and our Connect and Learn online page for upcoming webinars. We are glad that you could join us here today to hear about this case study from Tim Zelazny of ESD. As the project's lead and well consultant, he will discuss why health and wellness is trending, provide an overview of well, as well as how the well project overlaps with LEED, and what the added costs were above LEED and code. I also want to let you know that we will be recording today's webinar and sharing your recording in a follow-up email, along with a form to fill out in order to receive your AIA credits. You have been muted, but please type any questions that you have into the chat. At the end of the discussion, we will have time for Q&A and we'll answer questions that come up along the way. Tim is a senior envelope and healthy buildings specialist at Environmental Systems Design in the Energy and Eco Studio. ESD was the engineer and consultant on this project. Tim's passion is to create buildings that are healthy for the environment, or net zero, as well as to the occupants. He is a WELL AP with a background in architecture and engineering. His experience has helped him guide multiple clients to achieving WELL certification. 151 North Franklin was the nation's first WELL Gold core and shell high-rise, and he is excited to share this case study with you today.
Thank you, Thomas. Thomas, I'm really surprised you could pronounce my last name correctly. Usually it doesn't work out that way. But thank you, Illinois Green Alliance, for inviting me to present today. WELL happens to be my favorite health and wellness certification, and we'll be going over that today. And so I prepared by wearing my favorite shirt. I have a plant behind me. I have my water. I hope everybody had a good lunch. If you're eating right now, that's totally okay too. But like Thomas said, this webinar is being recorded, and any questions you have, feel free to put them into the Q&A section, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. But in this webinar, I have some videos just to keep everybody entertained. We're doing a surprise healthy activity. So without further ado, let's dive in. I know some of you on the webinar today have a pretty good understanding about WELL is. Some of you may not. And so I'm going to cover as much as I can. I'm not going to really get into too much detail. All the detail that I'm kind of saving time for is for the case study and what my lessons learned were, so that you can use those on your own projects. And to approach our first agenda item, why is health and wellness trending? Why are we seeing more movement with WELL certification? And so, one of the main reasons is because we all know that the indoor environment impacts our health the most, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention per this slide. That's because we're spending about 80% of our time indoors. And so our indoor environment is affecting our health more than our lifestyle behaviors like fitness and nutrition, more than our access to quality medical care and our genetics. And another main reason why health and wellness is trending is because when you're looking at, let's say like you're an owner of a company and over the entire year, you're spending the most amount of money on the salary and benefits of your employees. And so it's important that you're retaining your employees, that they're staying healthy so that they're productive, and that you're attracting the top talent. These costs far exceed how much money is being spent on rent and operations, or how much your lease is, and then how much you're spending on energy. And so that's why we're starting to see more of a focus on health and wellness certification, especially since a lot of the items under WELL, for example, are not covered by code. On the other side, there's a return on investment for buildings who certify their entire building. And so in the latter, we were talking more about, hey, if you own a company and you're building out a new space for your employees, getting that WELL certified, well, this is different. This is if you're a building owner or building manager, you want to certify your building, and what we can see from these two different studies is that it can reduce and it increases in how much you can ask for rent. It increases the chance for tenants to stay after their 10-year lease, for example, because they like the building based on the amenities it provides, or perhaps the quality of the space in terms of indoor air quality, for example. It can also result in increased occupancy or increased sales. And so the case study, for example, that I'm going to be presenting today, within, I want to say 10 months, the building was fully leased out following project completion. Another return on investment study that we can look at for a base building, for example, is the dollar and cents of well-being. And so to summarize, this building pursued WELL certification. It costs them about $150K, which is pretty typical if you're a large building. The larger your project is, the higher the WELL fee is going to be because it's square footage based, or the certification fees are square footage based. And so this was probably like a 1 million square foot base building. It was going to cost them about $150K to pursue WELL certification. And they wanted to know what the return on investment was going to be, or what their break even would be. And so they looked at what would happen if they didn't pursue WELL certification. What would be the potential increases in chronic conditions like inactivity or obesity? What would be the increase in turnover of tenants? What would be the decrease in productivity? And all these things over to the column on the right can show you what that break even was, like what that time period was to basically make reason to pursue and pay for the WELL certification. If you're working on a tenant project, for example, my biggest advice, and a lot of my colleagues would say, would be to approach the HR department within the corporation to see what funding is available to support a certification like WELL, because it's really advancing and improving the quality of the employees, and that kind of stuff is going to perk up HR's ears a little bit more, and they might have a little bit of budget compared to like a construction or people who are working more on the construction and design side for a corporation. And finally, to wrap up with why health and wellness is trending, there's other data out there that's supporting the value of ventilation, for example. And so this is by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And what Harvard is looking at is, hey, WELL is requiring increased ventilation through demand controlled ventilation. And so we can see that increased ventilation or increased outdoor air into a space in orange here. And what that is showing us is that the more outdoor air you're bringing in, the more productive the occupants of the building are going to be, because there's less CO2 in the air. And finally, to wrap up on our first agenda topic, there are a bunch of statistics out there that also support these kind of health and wellness certifications. My favorite statistics are number 5 and 6. And so number 5 says employees who are satisfied with their workplace are 16% more productive, 18% more likely to stay, and 30% more attracted to the company over competitors. And so again, that's attraction, retention, productivity. It's really adding another level to either improve productivity or to hire the talent that you're looking for and keeping it. And that's what a lot of these early adopters of WELL, like, for example, Google, has done. And one of the other reasons why some tech companies or just companies in general are starting to look at WELL certification is statistic number 6. A third of people track their health or fitness. And so a lot of people have Fitbits or they're tracking their health with various different apps. And then there's more people now who are tracking just the quality of the air in their space with sensors that they're buying on Amazon. And soon when more and more people start doing this and they're realizing the impact of the indoor environment on their health, they're going to start asking their management where they work on what they're doing to help supplement or kind of align with their employee values. All right, so we are 15 minutes through, and now we are on our second agenda topic, an overview of WELL certification. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with WELL, it's a health and wellness focused certification. It really focuses on the quality of life for the occupants instead of the quality of life for the environment. So while LEED looks at reducing consumption and energy, water, and waste, WELL is looking at improving air quality. It's about improving the quality of the space, so air quality, water quality, acoustical quality, lighting quality. It was founded by Delos. It's managed by the International Well Building Institute, and it's administered / verified by the third-party Green Business Certification Institute. I had to double check because I thought it was Green Building Certification Institute, but it is actually Green Business Certification Institute. WELL certification is applicable to many different project types. You can pursue WELL certification on a new building, an existing building, an interiors project, multifamily, really any kind of project. I'm sure if you did not fit any of those categories, you could reach out to IWBI and discuss your options further. WELL began gaining traction mainly in China due to outdoor air quality in China. And so in China, there were a lot of corporations who wanted to provide a healthy workplace, but the outdoor air was kind of sacrificing the quality of the indoor air. And so a lot of projects utilized WELL to improve their indoor air quality by learning the different technologies that WELL is implementing to filter the outdoor air before it gets into the interior. More recently, WELL has gained more traction in the US versus China. The US is leading the way even above Europe now. That switch happened about 2 years ago. WELL, some of the first WELL projects were out in California. That's where a lot of the early adopters are. That's where a lot of the tech companies are who want to attract and retain this type of talent whose values aligned with the health and wellness kind of personal goal. And now we have about 38 projects in Illinois. And before I forget, you yourself can become a WELL AP during coronavirus. IWBI is offering free WELL AP training. That is something that I can provide a link to after this presentation. So I'm making a note. But just like LEED P, you can become a well AP. And just like LEED, well has different categories, but they call them concepts. And so well has 7 concepts: air, water, nourishment, light, thermal comfort, fitness, and mind. The thing that I call out here is well V1. All my presentation today is focused on well V1, but there is well V2 currently out there in pilot phase. And so projects have the opportunity to either pursue well V1 or V2 right now. And I'll lightly touch on which one is which one is basically easier in different instances. And to wrap up our well overview, so we can get into the meat of the presentations, the lessons learned, that a cost is what kind of different levels of well certification can a project achieve. If you achieve all of the preconditions or all of the requirements of well, you receive well silver certification. And so from all of those 7 concepts on the previous slide, they all have different preconditions or requirements. And so as long as you meet all of those requirements, for example, with air passing the indoor air quality tests, you will receive well silver certification. If you, just like with LEED, there are different credits, but well calls them features that you can pursue to pick up more points to achieve well gold or platinum certification. The case study that I'm presenting today is well gold, while a project that I'm working on and just submitted in Chicago is pursuing well platinum certification. The process for certifying under well is pretty similar to LEED, but there are some key differences. To begin with, you register the project just like LEED, and you register the project in well online, not LEED online. And then after that, you upload all of the documentation showing proof via drawings, plans, policies that you're meeting the well features. Once you submit the documentation, GBCI will review it, and they'll get back to you with any comments, and then you can respond accordingly. Once all the documentation is approved, then you enter the performance verification stage. In well V1, GBCI will find your well assessor. That's who's going to come out and do the on-site testing. And so they're going to test air quality, lighting quality, water quality, acoustical quality, and that's a good thing because it's verifying performance, and it's also verifying that whatever you said you're going to do within your documentation, you're actually implementing at the building. Following their site visit, they're going to basically send you a report card, and that report card is going to give you the lab results of the air quality, water quality, et cetera. And anything where you're not meeting the well thresholds, they're going to give you the opportunity to fix. And so it might mean that you need to replace your filters because they were dirty and you weren't meeting the air quality tests, for example. So once you fix that issue, then you're going to pay for GBCI to come back out again. For my project, it was about $750 for them to come out and do one extra test. Wasn't a huge cost. And they're going to verify that now you are meeting all of the requirements. And once you do that, then you're certified. But you're not done. In 3 years, you have to recertify. That's because WELL wants to see continuous performance out of any building or project that says it's a WELL certified building. That's because like LEED doesn't do that because you're always going to have like the same plumbing fixture, for example, or if you do upgrade it, you better be upgrading to something more low flow. But with WELL, the performance of like air quality, for example, changes throughout the year, and it is important to stay on top of the maintenance to maintain the WELL thresholds or requirements. It's not difficult, it's just something to maintain. And at the end of the day, the nice thing about WELL certification, its differentiator is the verified performance that I talked about earlier. So when you go and market your project or building that it is WELL certified, it carries a little bit more weight through that verified on-site performance for marketability. On to our third agenda item out of 4. How does WELL and LEED intertwine with each other, basically? And so WELL has actually created a very handy crossover matrix for LEED v 2009. And so what we can see over here on the left are the LEED credits. And then over to the right, you can see equivalent to WELL credit. And so if your project is pursuing both certifications, it is a little bit easier to pursue WELL certification because of these crossovers. It isn't 1-to-1. I would say it's about 10 to 20% crossover, but enough to get you started and focusing more on health and wellness related aspects instead of consumption, like reduced energy and water and waste. If you're curious to learn more or you have different project types, these crossovers are available on IWBI's website. What ESD has pulled together, and there's a link at the very bottom here that we can share after the presentation, is how all these different certifications intertwine with each other. A lot of our clients are becoming a little bit overwhelmed because there's so many certifications out there. So what we created is a comparison. From the left are the energy focused certifications, all the way to the right, the health and wellness focused certifications. So what we can see here is that LEED falls somewhere in the middle, while WELL falls to the extreme right. And what exactly is LEED providing for health and wellness? It's really those healthy materials, those low emitting materials, and then some indoor air quality strategies, but not to the extent of WELL. The nice thing about WELL that I love about WELL certification is that it's not providing room for error. And so when you create a space that is of high quality with lighting, acoustics, water, and air, you're requiring the occupants to reap those benefits. It's not based on habits like fitness or exercise. These are things that are just going to happen, period, to optimize the health of your occupants, no matter the occupants' habits, genetics, or other factors. And then how exactly is WELL exceeding code and LEED? Well, I have broken it down by concept. We have about 25 minutes left of the presentation, and so we are good at a good point. I will lightly touch on all of these, but not get into too much depth because you will have these slides after. But on the far right in bullet points are exactly how WELL is exceeding code and LEED just on the preconditions or requirements side. And so when we look at feature 1, for example, code and LEED do not require indoor air quality tests, while WELL does for certification. And one of the ways that's going to help you meet those indoor air quality tests is to have MERV 13 filters, is to have a green cleaning plan, is to have low emitting materials. So it is helpful to pursue LEED, so you're installing low emitting materials and finishes. But really circling back to feature 1, indoor air quality performance test, that's just required for WELL, not required for code and LEED. What is also required under WELL v1 is demand controlled ventilation. That again is when we're bringing in more outdoor air. It is a code requirement, but only for 500 square feet rooms and above at a certain density, while WELL wants it to happen in any size of space that has a certain occupant density, so less than 40 square feet per person is the threshold. And so whenever CO2 exceeds 800 parts per million, WELL is going to require that more outdoor air is brought into that conference room, for example, regardless of its size. That's how it's different from code. This was a hard thing for a lot of projects to achieve under V1. So V2, it's no longer a precondition, and so it wouldn't be on this list of precondition requirements. The other things I lightly touched on, but there are some kind of alternate adherence paths for a lot of these features, which you can find on WELL Online. And so let's say that you don't have carbon filter rack space, like on feature 5. The case study that I worked on did not. So there was an alternate adherence path to achieving the intent of the feature without providing the rack space, and that was to promise to install standalone carbon filters in any tenant space that was pursuing WELL certification. I'll touch more on that in the next agenda topic, the case study. But focusing on the water precondition requirements above code and LEED, WELL is going to require water testing. And so that happens during the on-site verification. They're going to test a bunch of different parameters of water quality. But my biggest advice is that you look at your jurisdiction's annual water quality test reports. That's what I did on my project. And I was quickly able to see that my building wasn't going to have any problems passing the water quality test, except for chlorine. The chlorine that was measured at the water treatment facility in Chicago was a little bit high. It was a little bit too close for comfort. And so we went ahead and did a pre-test for my project on just chlorine. It was about $500 for the sample. And that gave us the confidence of whether or not we were going to achieve the preconditions of water that WELL requires before committing to more of the certification fees. Up next is nourishment. And so we all know that code and LEED does not focus on nourishment at all, unless it's some kind of pilot credit or innovation credit. It will be a requirement for your project to achieve the nourishment preconditions if and only if your project is supplying daily food to the occupants of the project boundary. And so for a base building, if you're pursuing WELL certification for your base building, if you have vending machines on every floor that you pay for the tenants to get food from as an added benefit of being in your building, then yes, the food and the beverages and the vending machine must meet the WELL preconditions. If you are certifying a tenant space, then you would have to look at the nourishment preconditions if your tenant space had its own cafeteria that the client is operating and maintaining and paying for. If the cafeteria is outside of the project boundary, or if it's like a retail space on the ground floor, then that is exempt. It's only things that you have control over or that you are paying for directly as the owner. For light, there are some preconditions. It's more so on the tenant side. If you're pursuing WELL interior certification for your client who's building out their tenant space, then it would be advisable to install task lighting to meet features 53 and 54. You would need to install either automatic or manual blinds. And in both cases, for the base building or tenant space pursuing WELL certification, you would need to meet feature 55 lighting glare. And so what lighting glare is just proving through lighting cut sheets that the selected light fixtures are not emitting too much glare. More on that in my case study on how we determine that. if it was missing in the cut sheets. Moving on to fitness, our second to last concept to cover what is required above code and LEED. If your project is less than 5 stories tall, then you need to have a prominent stair. If your project is over 5 stories, then this is not required. But the prominent stair just means that the stair is visible before elevators or escalators, for example, and that there is some artwork or music at the stair to promote use, because what we'll want to see on these shorter projects is people using the stair over the elevators. And then if you are certifying a well interiors project, you also need to have incentives for activity. These are usually captured in HR benefits, either subsidized or reduced fitness. Fitness memberships would meet the precondition or feature 65. It is not a requirement for core and shell projects because as the core and shell developer, you do not hold the HR benefits for tenants. For the comfort concept, a lot of this is tied to if you are building out the finished interior space. And so for core and shell, not applicable, as we can see here. But if you are working on a well interiors project, to meet feature 73 ergonomics, you would want to have sit-stand desks, which are more and more common these days anyways. Not to make well sound more and more expensive the further and further along we go with slides. But a lot of these things are somewhat standard practice now. And then feature 74, exterior noise test. This we did not have an issue passing at my previous well projects. This is more of a concern if your project is located near a very noisy source like train tracks. Then you would definitely want to pre-test for acoustics before pursuing further with well certification. Same thing goes with feature 75. And not a precondition for core and shell projects because it's missing the interior build out. But if you're working on a well interior project, this is one of the more difficult features to meet. It means that your HVAC has to meet certain noise criteria or not exceed certain noise criteria in decibels. I will say well V2 is a little bit more lenient. So if you're worried about meeting this precondition because you have a lot of hard surfaces in your interior build out, then I would advise pursuing well V2 instead of well V1 because it is a little bit easier on the interior noise test side. And finally, to wrap up, we have the mind concept. A lot of things here really aren't considered added cost. They're just items to track to improve basically the overall quality of the space. You'll want to have a health and wellness library that can be either physical or digital. There are some surveys, there's some biophilia, beauty and design, but it's all kind of up to interpretation. And as long as you're doing something that is believable, that is improving basically the overall quality of space, then you are on a good path forward. But indoor plants, for example, would help you meet biophilia or just full height glazing to views outdoors. And so it doesn't have to be comprehensive. So speaking of biophilia, now we're moving into our last agenda item. What we can see in this picture is a picture of the lobby of 151 North Franklin. There are a lot of different aspects of biophilia, but mainly we can see the golden rectangle was used in a lot of patterning. A A lot of the finishes are natural materials like stone. We have these really nice light fixtures, which do not emit too much glare. And then we have this really nice light feature at the exterior that changes based on the weather outside. And then we can also see some plants. So this is an image of the rooftop sky garden. We don't have time to really go through the tour like I thought we did, but I have a video that I will share at the end of the presentation that gives you a little bit more images of what the building looks like. And maybe in the future, we will have a real tour in person. Also, here's a better picture of that outdoor light installation that helped us with the biophilia precondition. This outside lobby on the second floor is open to the public. So at the end of the day, this was our final WELL scorecard for 151 North Franklin. It achieved WELL Gold certification. I'm not going to dive into every strategy that we pursued. Instead, I want to focus on the added cost items and what our lessons learned were, but you'll have these slides. And so what exactly were our added cost items? A lot of it I've already talked about in previous slides, but to be specific, we performed preliminary air quality tests because LEED v 2009 did not look at low-emitting furniture. And so we wanted to test our conference room, for example, to make sure that we were going to pass the indoor air quality test, even with furniture that we weren't 100% sure on. And the test turned out positive or good. We had installed some more no smoking signs above the LEED certification. We implemented a different parts per million CO2 set point to achieve WELL certification. We committed to installing standalone air purifiers with carbon filters for any future WELL tenant to meet one of the preconditions. We also committed to quarterly cooling coil cleaning, that is removing or just cleaning the cooling coils to mitigate any kind of mold growth that could have happened. Would not happen anyways at 151 North Franklin because they have UV lighting on their cooling coils. And then we implemented some additional maintenance. And so it wasn't a huge added cost for this client to pursue WELL certification. John Buck Company is the developer of the project, and their mission is that good design creates better business. And so the base building or the base scope for this project was already at a high level. It's a Class A office building. And so one of the reasons why there weren't too many added costs outside of the certification fees. Some of the documentation items that I want to highlight here is especially precondition 55 below. We haven't talked about this one in depth yet, but basically to what the lighting cut sheets were missing the candelas per meter square information. We all know that meters is not a common metric in the US, and so it's missing from some of the cut sheets. And so what I used is a software called Dialux to simulate the unified glare ratio of the fixture within the software. And so very quickly with the lighting manufacturer's IES file, that I could measure what the actual unified glare ratio was to meet the precondition. And so I had to be underneath 19, and the lighting fixture was 15, for example, here. And so if you're missing the candelas meter square information from your cut sheets, I recommend using Dialux. It's free. And then another documentation item that we did, WELL V1 was going to require automated shading at all rooms within the building. The building only had shades from floors 2 and up, not on floor 1 in the main lobby, mainly because the building is surrounded by other tall buildings and they're not really getting daylight anyways, except for at 4 p.m. on December 22nd. And so I submitted this to WELL to see if we could get a pass, saying like, hey, we don't have shades in our lobby. We see that they're not required in lobbies in well V2. Can we get an exception just through the simulation? And so I will report on those, how that was ruled at the end of this presentation, which we only have a few slides left. So following the documentation being approved, we had our on-site testing. Here is a sampling of all the different tests that were done by GPCI. I walked the site with the performance verifier to help them select what spaces to test, help them get access. But as you can see, multiple different equipment. Some of this equipment is direct read, so you can immediately know if you're passing the well threshold, while some of it, like the water, you have to send to a lab to get tested. So we got a report card. We passed everything except for one error test, and it was in a shared elevator lobby corridor on one of the floors, and we were scratching our heads, why didn't we pass? Because on all the other floors in the same location, we did pass. And so unfortunately, well wasn't there to provide us with source recommendations or recommendations on how to fix. That was the lessons learned. But we circled back with the agency who did our pre-testing to come up with a curative action plan. We also did some of our own research. We decided, hey, we're going to clean this corridor. We're not passing because of dust, or PM10. And so we thought that cleaning would resolve the issue, as well as a little bit of a flush out. Before we had GBCI come out to do a retest for $750, we did our own preliminary test to make sure we were okay. The pre-test showed that we were okay, but we ended up failing again. Why? Is because GBCI wasn't using the same handheld devices our consultant was. And so that's something to make sure you're doing as well, that you're using the same devices for testing indoor air quality. And that you can get from GBCI. And so we had to go back, we had to come up with some more curative action to resolve the indoor air quality issue or the dust issue on that one floor. And when GBCI came back out, we're just like, hey, can you just test another location on the other side of the elevator lobby? And when we did that, we were passing 100% on the other side of the elevators. So it was only in this area where the red is, where we weren't passing, and that's because there was an unoccupied tenant area. We weren't getting any ventilation from that tenant area into the corridor. And so we just weren't getting enough air flush out and well understood. And they took the other sampling area to move forward with the well certification, where we achieved well gold. For acoustics, we passed everything that was preconditioned. We did not pass the internally generated noise, but that was an optimization. It was just something that we were kicking around to see if we would get it for points. But like I said, we were under well V1, which is a little bit more difficult. It's definitely easier in well V2. And at the end of the day, well did not approve our reasoning for the lobby shades. They wanted shades in the lobby, but again, in V2, they are not required. Just some information. So now we have 5 minutes for questions.
Thanks so much, Tim. That was an awesome presentation, and we did get a few questions in, so hopefully we can get to most of them, and the ones that we don't answer, we can follow up, put them in our follow-up email. So the first question that was asked was, what is the most challenging part of well certification?
The most challenging part about well certification is not knowing what you're up against. And so if you are either in an existing building or a new building, you really need to do your due diligence to make sure that you're going to pass the on-site verification. And so while you're back checking the cut sheets and everything to make sure that you have all this different equipment to help you meet air quality tests, water quality, looking at the water quality reports from the city. That's the hardest thing is figuring that out, is where you're at and what you need to do to meet the preconditions. And it may or may not require pre-testing.
Great. The next question is there any crossover for LEED v4?
They haven't made it yet. Good question.
The next one is referencing the video that you sent in. There is a reference to gauging participants' emotional status. Do you know how that is done?
It's likely through surveys. That would be my guess, because there are some well optimizations tied to occupant surveys.
Awesome. The next question we have is, when you recertify, are you required to fulfill the requirements as part of your original application, or does it require you to upgrade a new version?
That's a really good question. The next time we recertify, we're going to still be under V1, but just like LEED, LEED V2, for example, is no longer available. And so once well comes out with newer and newer versions and the other one's sunset, then yeah, you have to recertify under the newer versions. But they give you some time.
Another participant asked, can you choose WELL V2 specific credits to pursue, or is it all or nothing, meaning all credits must be WELL version 1 or all credits must be WELL version 2?
All is the answer. You can't swap.
Awesome.
It's a good question because you can currently with LEED.
Cool, great, thank you. The next question is there flexibility to WELL certifications? Are you a tenant and don't have control over major MEFP features of overall building? Sorry, that.
Yes, there are. There's more leniency in WELL V2. So if you have a concern about the base building being too old or not supporting the certification, then I would look at V2. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to pass the same air quality tests, water quality tests. And so you have control over that as the tenant. Like, let's say the base building only has like a MERV 11 filter and you're worried about passing the indoor air quality test. You still have to pass the same test as everybody else. You may have to look at implementing some standalone filters in some areas of concern. But really, at the end of the day, don't get too scared. Again, look at what's surrounding you. Like, are you getting good water quality from the city? Is the outdoor air good generally in your area? And if the answers to those questions are yes, then, and that's likely the case, then I don't think you're going to have too much supplemental filtration, for example, that you would need. But you're just going to have to do a little bit of homework.
The last question for today is, where do we find the chart that lists all the certifications?
I will send you a list or a link in the follow-up email.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you again for speaking with us today, Tim, and for providing such a great presentation.
Yeah, I have a bonus. Nobody asked about COVID except for in the poll, and so I'll share another link in the follow-up email, how different health and wellness certifications can help address potential COVID-19 strategies. So what we can see here is that WELL addresses a ton. Thank you, Stan, for the nice comment. And then also WELL came out with their own document shortly after I created that matrix, which we will also share in the follow-up email.
Great, thanks. And yeah, like mentioned, I will be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the slides and the all the resources that Tim mentioned. So definitely keep an eye out for that, as well as an AIA form, so you can fill that out to receive your credits if that applies to you. So thank you again, Tim, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.